Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brander Smith with the National Police Association, and this is the National Police Association podcast. I have this guy is so busy. He's crazy. He does so much. But I knew you needed to meet him because he is a fellow board member with me and a bunch of other great people on the Wounded Blue board. And he's also the owner of, I got to get this right, Bator Training and Consulting. But he's an author, he's an MBA, he's a podcaster, he's a financial guy. He just wears so many hats. And so I thought we could have a really terrific conversation. So, Ken Bator, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel privileged to be able to be on your show and to talk to you, Betsy.
Well, so let's start out. I I want to talk about how you got involved with an organization like the Wounded Blue and how you got so law enforcement adjacent. Talk about that.
Well, I'll try to make a long story fairly short, but you mentioned that my original career was in banking and working with credit unions, and started my own business and doing consulting back in 2001. And around that time, one of my first clients was Chicago Patrolmen's Federal Credit Union. And for anybody that understands the credit union industry at all, it's very insular and has their little cliques. And at the time, there was a airplane credit union group, and there was a firefighters credit union association, and a postal workers credit union association. It was nothing for police. And I developed a friendship with Scott Arney. He's still the CEO of what's now the National Police Federal Credit Union, not Chicago Patrolmen's anymore today. And I said, "Do we have anything like that for police credit unions?" And he said, "No." I says, "Well, do you want to do that?" And so entrepreneurially, we created the Police Officers Credit Union Association. And so I got to meet a lot of great active police officers, retired police officers that were involved in these credit unions. And then fast forward to 2014 when Ferguson happened. And I was always appreciative and had a lot of respect for law enforcement. But when I was sitting there watching Ferguson burn and watching police basically get vilified for what in my opinion, was exactly the right thing to do, that's where, my appreciation and support of law enforcement, went way up. And that eventually led me to do public safety talk radio, which it was part of the POCUA, and eventually got me to introduce to Randy Sutton, who's the founder of the Wounded Blue. And a couple years ago, or actually a year ago, he asked me to be on the board as the treasurer because of going back full circle to my banking days way back when.
Well, the National Police Association, we too support the American law enforcement officer through all kinds of different advocacy than what the Wounded Blue does.
Right.
We get really involved in the legal side and the media side. And as you were outlining all that, I was thinking back to when I was a 21-year-old police rookie in the Chicago area, going to the academy in Cook County. And one of the things that, and again, I was a couple weeks out of college, I was raised on the farm, and all of a sudden, everybody in the world wanted to give me a credit card. And, uh, and I remember thinking, I'm not sure this is such a great idea, but and then throughout the years, I saw a lot of police officers didn't really handle their money very well. I mean, we don't make a lot of money, but we do make some money. And, but you know, everybody wanted to be involved with us financially, I guess, because they know we're going to get paid. Talk about that.
You know, I can't speak for the banks that wanted to throw credit cards your way. Although, I remember back in the day, being, a senior in college, in DePaul University in Chicago in the early '90s, really early '90s. and getting all of these offers from Chase and Citibank and so on and so forth. And I think that that banking mentality, especially back at the time, is okay. They're building their career. We want ours to be their number one card, so they want to get them early. I've always said that, when it comes to, helping law enforcement right at the beginning, when they're in the academy, just starting the job, the vast majority, almost all police credit unions out there, whether they're a big one like the National Police Federal Credit Union, or some of the small boutique ones like Alabama Law Enforcement or Police Federal Credit Union of Omaha, do an excellent job of getting into the academies and trying to teach people good money management so that, when they put in, hopefully a great 25, 30 years, that they can retire comfortably and they, can have the life that they want. Because, I've found vicariously, that when your finances aren't in order, it affects your physical nature, it affects your profession and so forth. It's all a domino effect, Betsy.
It really is, and law enforcement officers already have issues with physical well-being, physical health, mental well-being, things like that. And you're a guy, and you're really open about this, who had some of your own demons, you had some of your own struggles, and you're a really resilient guy. So here you are in this industry, you're trying to support the American law enforcement officer. You're doing media, all that, but you had some of your own struggles, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. I in my own show, Public Safety Talk Radio, I'm not shy about talking about my alcoholism. I actually surprisingly, began getting sober right before I started that show. So, I drank heavily for about 30 years, and certainly have a ton of interesting stories that have to do with that. But once I finally kind of hit bottom and got myself right, ironically, going back to your original question, or is that, I wanted to get control back. I was out of control. My credit card balances were out of control. My business was out of control. My home life was out of control, and it was all because of alcohol. And then, fortunately, something clicked and said, I need to get control back, and the best way for me to do that is to get sober, and I've never looked back.
So what have you learned in your advocacy for law enforcement? And this has been going on a long time, that you want other citizens to know.
Yeah, get to know the person. I think a lot of the attacks are on the badge and not the individual. Yeah, I think almost always, and there's few exceptions. You would know this better than I do. There are some, gals and guys that, because of their attitude, just shouldn't be cops. But those are few and far between. Every conversation, with the exception of one or two that I've had over 25 years, has been positive. Whether it's been, with a cup of coffee, or whether it's been at a restaurant. And a great example is, I was just going through Houston Intercontinental last month and got to speak to a number of ICE agents. And they're good people that just simply want to clean up our country. And some of them, are sons and daughters of immigrants themselves, but they were legal immigrants that did it the right way, that went through the process. And they're not going to let anybody cut the line. They want to keep their country safe. So, if there's anything that I could tell anybody out there that, may, be somewhere in the gray area, go to, coffee with a cop, go and, talk to your neighbor that happens to be a police officer. They're a mother, they're a father, they're a brother, they're a sister. They just want to do a job and do it well.
That is so well said. Yeah, I saw and chatted with a bunch of ICE agents in the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport here a few weeks ago with my 13-year-old grandson. And they were so nice to him. They're fist bumping him. And because I had him go and tell all of them, thank you for what they're doing, and things like that. And they were so gracious and so happy to be there. And the line moved so quickly with them there. I was really appreciative of that and what they're doing. And that's the thing, you saw as a citizen, you saw Ferguson, then you saw George Floyd in that whole situation because things
Mhm.
were starting to kind of calm down, right? And then the death of George Floyd happened, and we saw, geez, really over 2 years of riots, 260 violent riots, so many police
Yeah.
officers injured, and that continued vilification. And now this ridiculous, unhinged vilification of federal law enforcement
Right.
officers. It is wildly frustrating, isn't it?
It is, you mentioned George Floyd, and there's a very short, interesting story. I've been blessed to talk to a lot of people like you that are doing great things for law enforcement out there, and one of those other folks is Vicky Newman, who runs How to Love Our Cops.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I literally just weeks before that George Floyd incident was talking to Vicky on the phone and talking about some of the things that she was doing and some of the things that I was doing for the POCUA at the time. And I said, maybe this COVID thing, has a small silver lining, because for a while, and you may remember this, everybody that was in public safety was kind of lumped into this hero bubble. Whether you're a
Mm-hmm.
firefighter, EMT, emergency room professional, police officer, and so forth, that they were all kind of grouped together as, look at these heroes that are out there doing their job, and they could get COVID and they could die and everything. And I remember telling Vicky, I says, maybe this is the turning point. Maybe this is what we can leverage for law enforcement, after that crap in Ferguson, and after, some of the other incidents. And she was very, very poignant. She said, it's nice to have it right now, but I think we're just a hair away from one other incident happening, and this all turns, the other way again. And I'm like, well, I hope it doesn't happen. And then, literally like weeks later, I'm like, son of a bitch, she was right.
Yeah, she's been a guest on the show,
I'm
and
sure.
as I always like to say, the only thing more cynical than a veteran cop is a cynical police wife.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've met a lot of spouses of police officers. A lot of your typical traditional marriages where the wife is not a police officer, and the husband is. And I got to tell you, the wives scare me. Not just in a kind of a joking way. I would rather be had cuffs on. These women are tough in a good way, and they have to be. But it's like, yeah, put me in the back of a squad car before I've got like two or three of these women chasing me, man.
that is that is so true, and they're proud of it too.
Oh yeah, as they should be.
Absolutely. So tell me about, because you were doing radio for quite a while, and then you got into podcasting. Talk about that whole thing and what you've been trying to. There's so many different things uh, that you have been trying to get the word out about.
Yeah, I think the best way to kind of capsulize it is, I kind of fell into banking back after I got out of college in the early 90s. It wasn't really what I wanted to do. It just happened to be convenient at the time. And then when I went out on my own in 2001, I made kind of the conscious decision to just, to be like water, and where there's an opportunity, and not only just an opportunity, but something that I really want to do, I'm going to do it. And so, things morphed from banking and consulting to the Police Officers Credit Union Association to, in the mid 2010s, I came across a guy that taught me podcasting. I did a little bit of radio, but it quickly segued into podcasting, and I loved it. And then, fast forward to 2020 and COVID hit, and I wanted to keep the Police Officers Credit Union Association alive, so I started Public Safety Talk Radio. to use that as a promotion tool for the POCUA. Now, the irony is the POCUA is no more, but
Yeah.
Public Safety Talk Radio is still going strong. So, I've probably dabbled in a lot of things. Some of them I just dabbled in for a few months and said, well, this sucks. I'm not going to do this anymore. And others like the podcasting and my consulting and the work that I do with and for law enforcement, is not only, in one way, shape, or form pays some of the bills, but, is a real passion of mine. And I really love what I'm doing today.
Talk about some of that you're doing for the Public Safety Talk Radio, and what are you seeing that people are interested in?
Well, when it comes to podcasting, one of the other offshoots that I did when I started podcasting is I had the opportunity to write for Podcast Magazine. It was around for 3 years. It's no longer around, but given some of my background with working with police, they asked me to cover true crime. And so when it comes to that, people love true crime. Yeah, we used to joke about it on Podcast Magazine because everybody had a category. Mine was true crime, and mine was always easy. I always had too many stories, to talk about. We used to joke and say, true crime to podcasting is like pornography to the internet. I mean, it just, all you got to do is click a couple things and you'll find it. But true crime is really popular out there. I think that the most of those folks, are interested in the puzzle solving. Some probably are freaks, but the vast majority, I would say, 90% or more, enjoy true crime. Not from the crime aspect or the gore, but the forensic and the work that detectives do to solve these cases. That is really the motivation or attraction. So, I mentioned earlier that, probably the proudest thing that I'm doing right now is working with National Police Federal Credit Union. We launched the National Police Podcast Network. We have a true crime podcast in that network. It's Facing Evil. There's one other that we're looking at. And, one that you will probably well know about. We're in the process of making Rescuing 911 into a podcast. If everything goes right, that'll be going live Police Week.
So let's talk about Rescuing 911. Randy Sutton, Lieutenant Randy Sutton, founder of the Wounded Blue, big friend of the National Police Association, big friend of the show, and my partner on the Nancy Guthrie coverage.
And neither one of you solved it. I just want to tell you, I gave Randy a bunch of crap about that. Now it's my turn. It's like it's not solved. Okay, you guys were on top of it. Totally joking, obviously.
Every day when I talk to Randy, I'm like, she's still missing, and oh boy. But Randy's got such a storied career, and
Yeah.
the book Rescuing 911, which I highly recommend to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It'll warm your heart, it'll break your heart, and I love what you guys are doing with the book, bringing it to the podcast format, right?
Yeah, it has been and continues to be a lot of fun. The backstory is we started this National Police Podcast Network, and really appreciate that Randy wanted to be a part of it. And he's certainly done a lot of podcasts and everything. And to make a long story short, the easiest way to get Randy involved was to start a new podcast. And I said, you've got this great new book, Rescuing 911. And given, my podcast producing days, I said, the book actually lends itself really, really well to a limited series podcast. Not where we're doing this every day, but we actually made a podcast where it's not just an audio book, it's an accompaniment where, there's a number of things that are extras that he doesn't mention in the book, that we talk about in the podcast. Now, unfortunately for Randy, he had to spend practically 2 full days with me, in a hotel room recording. And if I'm so
Wow.
inclined, if I'm so inclined, there's at least about a half a dozen really really good bloopers that are on video and
Sure.
audio. One in particular I'll share is we finished it on the second day, and I said, "That's a wrap." And he said something like, "Thank God." I
Yeah.
said, I said, you want to start over just in case we miss something, do it all over again. He goes, yeah, yeah, let's do that for sure. As he's taking off the mic and getting ready to walk out the door.
Right. Exactly. Well, and that's the thing. And the stories in that book are, um, again, the it's a lot. And I really I appreciate the kind of the audio component to that. And especially I'm kind of that age where I'd rather listen to a book
Right.
anyway than read it, or I like to listen to it and then go back and read and highlight things that I want to look more into, things like that. And that's why I appreciate what you guys did. And it's going to be released Police Week, right? You said.
That is the plan right now. Barring anything unforeseen, what we're working on in the back scenes, I've got all of the episodes edited and ready to go. So what we really want to do is maybe there's 8 episodes from the book. And what we think we're going to do is release one episode as kind of a teaser, episode one, and then every day during Police Week do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from Saturday to, or excuse me, from Sunday to Saturday. That's the way we released Facing Evil
Mhm,
back
mhm.
2 years ago. And I think it's appropriate for Police Week. The National Police Federal Credit Union and Police Mortgage that helped us do this. They're very respectful for Police Week. They're obviously big supporters of what goes on in DC. And I remember 2 years ago, they're like, we don't want to be, pushing mortgages and selling checking accounts. We want to be respectful that week. And
Right.
so it was so appropriate and so well aligned to roll out Facing Evil a couple of years ago during that week, where it's just information. We're going to do the same thing with Rescuing 911. And one last point on that, you said, sometimes it's great to hear it. Yeah, I've been very adamant that the podcast is not a replacement or just an audiobook version. It's an accompaniment. There are
Mhm.
things in the book that you won't hear about in the podcast, just for simply it didn't come up or didn't go with the flow. Same thing, there are things that Randy and I talk about, like we have a practically a whole episode on him being a field training officer. And it was great content. That isn't in the book.
Right.
So, much like, back in the day in the 90s when I was so, big on building a career in learning, I read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Then I went and got the audio book and I would listen to it in the car, and I found, I found things in the audio that I didn't find in the book, and vice versa,
Mhm.
whether it was just not there or it was just a different way of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like we're turning the corner again in this country, that we're leaving 2020 behind as far as demonizing law enforcement, and we're moving back to seeing cops for the heroes they are? What do you see as a normal person out in society?
Yeah, it's a great question, Betsy. One that I posed to Randy too. I would say that Randy is probably a little bit more optimistic and positive about it than I am. Um, yeah, I think that we really need to reach that gray area. I am a believer that most people fall into one of 3 buckets. Either the bucket like you and I, where we staunchly, not blindly, but staunchly support law enforcement. We'll call out the wrong when it truly is wrong, but
Mm,
we're supporters of law enforcement. And then you have the other group, that, will always hate police officers, will always hate law enforcement for whatever reason, and you're just not going to reach them. But there's a big group of a gray area that there, maybe, people like I was before Ferguson, where I certainly, had an appreciation for law enforcement, but wasn't so staunchly supported. Those are
Mhm.
the people that we need to reach. Those are the people, that we need to, create some common sense with. Is, okay, maybe you didn't like the fact that, you got pulled over when you were 18 and, the cop was a bad cop and he was rude to you, but that's not everybody. They do a tough job. Certainly there's things that need to be changed. But to answer your question, I would like to be optimistic. But one of the things that I've seen since this current administration took over or took over again, however you want to look at it, is whatever you want to call it, that 20% or 15% or 25% is just, biting so hard without logic, just with blind, ridiculous emotion. Yeah,
Mhm.
and some of them are smart. Randy mentioned this in the podcast, and it was very poignant. Is most people realize that the fund the police phrase just isn't the winner. Yeah,
Right.
even the people that hate police realize the stupidity in that phrase. So yeah, they change it to, well, law enforcement reform, or they tack on the politically correct for some, the abolish ICE, which is just another version of defund the police. So
Right.
I would love to say that we're turning to the different side of the coin for more support for law enforcement. But I think that radical portion of our country is just going to be loud and fight tooth and nail for years to come. I hate to say that, but that's what I'm seeing.
Well, and I think that's why we have to get louder
Yeah.
and the people who support us, we've got to be out there, we've got to be loud, we've got to be factual, not emotional, but factual and passionate about
Yeah.
our support for law enforcement, not just, rah rah the police, but how law enforcement positively affects our entire society. You can't have a constitutional republic without good quality law enforcement. And so I think that's why I appreciate what you're doing so much, because there's those of us that were on the job and we can, cheerlead the cops all we want. But to have somebody like you who really came to this as just a citizen who loves his country and
Mhm.
understands how society works, we just appreciate you so much. um Ken, where can people find you? Where can they get the book too? And where can they find you, your company, the podcast? Give it to me. Give me all.
Sure. Sure. Well, rescuing 911, as I am doing in the podcast, I am strongly suggesting that people go to the Wounded Blue website and join the 911 Club. If you do that, you'll get a copy of Rescuing 911. You'll even get a signature of Randy Sutton on there. You probably won't get the nice message that he put for me on this particular copy, but you'll get Randy Sutton's signature if you're one of the first thousands. So that's, you can certainly get it on Amazon, but I encourage people to do it through the 911 Club on the Wounded Blue. Me, I'm pretty easy to find. My website is btcinc.net. That's B as in boy, T as in Tom, C as in cat. Inc.net. You can connect with me there. I would say that the best social media to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. Unless you're a radical liberal, I'll answer your messages on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is probably the best social media. And last, NPPN Live, or NPPN.live, I should say, is the National Police Podcast Network. That's where you'll find Rescuing 911, you'll find Facing Evil, you'll find Public Safety Talk Radio, and a number of other great podcasts that are first responder related.
That is fantastic. Well, Ken, I can't thank you enough for doing this. I will see you soon. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, you can visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, the brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.